Waste awareness and hazardous waste training. Presentation objective. Waste definition and overview. Waste management rules. Waste handling responsibilities and proper waste management. RCRA/hazardous waste management regulations. Hazardous waste definition and codes. Specify points of generation of hazardous waste. Learn how to classify waste streams generated during operations and which are regulated as hazardous waste. Learn process of shipping waste and applicable documentation. Learn roles and responsibilities of personnel involved in hazardous waste management. Waste definition and overview. A waste is a substance or material which we can no longer use and will have to be discarded and sent to disposal. Some common types of wastes generated offshore. Hazardous waste, for example paint waste. Exploration and production (E&P) waste, example, used completion fluids. Universal waste, example, batteries, fluorescent lights, mercury thermostats and switches, antifreeze, pesticides. Naturally occurring radioactive material norm. Unused chemicals, completion fluids D&C, frac fluids, acids. Off-spec chemicals. Flush pipeline chemicals. Painting materials, paint, thinner, sandblasting material. Glycol or amine flushing materials. Booms, pads, rags. Flog removal from water treating equipment. Waste Management Regulations. EPA's Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) covers all aspects of waste generation and disposal, generation, handling, disposal, and documentation. State regulations also apply and may be more stringent than federal requirements. Regulations require waste generator facilities to follow specific transportation and disposal requirements. Maintain adequate storage areas for specific waste streams. Maintain accurate records of waste generation, disposal, and shipment. And report all recycled and reused materials. Additionally, we must certify to agencies that we minimize waste to the greatest degree possible by following the waste handling hierarchy procedure. All generators are required to follow the waste handling hierarchy procedure. Reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, and lastly, dispose. Reduce waste at the source. Only order the amount of chemical or other material needed to do a job. When surpluses are ordered, try to transfer to another similar job. Consult with experts when ordering exceptional materials. Reuse. When placing an order for chemicals, stipulate in writing with the vendor that they will take back for credit all unopened, uncontaminated containers or sacks. Recycle. Many wastes can be recycled or regenerated for continued use. Recover. Recovering energy from waste, for example flammable liquids. Dispose. Sending to a landfill. Waste handling responsibilities for generators/transfer facilities. The facility site superintendent/supervisor/manager should store all waste drums and chemical containers within a proper designated containment area. Inspect waste storage areas routinely and keep records of observations. Checklist. Look for start date, required labels and markings. Make sure the containers are sealed/closed, so no leaks or vapors are released. Do not commingle incompatible waste streams. Ensure there is an emergency plan, hazardous waste contingency plan, including internal and external contact lists, and follow the waste management flowcharts. What to remember for proper waste management. You should know and follow the internal and external requirements for waste management. Always follow the waste handling hierarchy. Ensure that all wastes are properly classified. Classification and segregation of incompatible wastes is critical for regulatory compliance. Ensure there is a specific disposal process for all waste streams. Do not just throw discarded items into the nearest trash bin. The waste management process can be complex and confusing. Ask for assistance when needed. Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) Background and Requirements. RCRA was passed in 1976 by the EPA to establish requirements for waste regulation. RCRA governs the administrative handling of waste from generation to disposal, cradle to grave. EPA may grant an individual state jurisdiction to regulate. For instance, Louisiana regulates hazardous waste in onshore and in coastal waters. BOEM/BC can enforce RCRA regulations in OCS waters on behalf of EPA. Some wastes are not governed by RCRA, but by other federal state regulations. For example, NORM, naturally occurring radioactive material, are regulated by individual states, and PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, are regulated by the Toxic Substances Control Act (SCA). There is some overlap between RCRA and DOT for waste shipping. For example, all RCRA hazardous wastes are DOT hazardous materials when in transportation. However, not all DOT hazardous materials are RCRA hazardous wastes. What classifies as hazardous waste? Waste that meets the regulatory definition of a listed or characteristic waste, or waste that the generator believes should be treated as hazardous. There are several exemptions or partial relief from haze waste regulatory burdens if waste is recycled or reused. E&P wastes are not hazardous by definition. Potentially hazardous waste treated as universal. Used refined oil. However, a waste is not exempt from all haze waste requirements just because it is recycled. What is a listed hazardous waste? A listed waste is any solid waste that contains any amount of a specifically listed hazardous waste, regardless of the concentration of that material in the waste itself. Note: keep in mind that a solid waste may be a solid, liquid, or gas. A list of federal hazardous wastes can be found as U.S. RCRA Federal Listed Wastes in 40 CFR 261.30-261.33. F-List: waste streams from non-specific industry activities, example spent solvents used in degreasing activities. K-List: waste streams from specific sources. P&U lists: discarded commercial chemical products, unused chemicals, off-spec chemicals, container residues, and spill residues. Tips on listed hazardous waste. The only F-listed wastes we normally receive at our ECOSER facilities from offshore generators are paint and related materials. We do not generate K-listed waste. P&U lists: specific unused chemicals. Used chemicals and mixtures of chemicals are not P or U listed wastes. We only receive a few U-listed wastes. One example is unused methanol, which has a waste code U154. What is a characteristic hazardous waste? RCRA D001 ignitable equals Class 3 flammable. If you see a .flammable label on a chemical, it will be a haze waste when disposed. RCRA D002 corrosive is not a Class 8. The corrosive definition is based on ability to corrode metals or human skin. This is not the same as the RCRA D002 corrosive definition. All D002 corrosive wastes will be Class 8 hazardous materials when shipped. However, you can have wastes with a pH of 2 to 5 that are not RCRA D002 corrosive, but are Class 8 hazardous materials. D001-ignitable has a flash point less than 140 degrees F, 60 degrees C. D002-corrosive has a pH of 2.0 or less or 12.5 and above. D003-reactive reacts violently, explode, create heat, emit toxic gases, vapors, or fumes, etc. when mixed with water or other materials. D004 to D043-toxic fails the EPA toxicity test (TCLP). Each toxic waste has its own waste code. Acute hazardous wastes. Acute wastes are hazardous waste streams that have extremely hazardous properties. Some F list codes, all P list codes. Example: lingam, acrolein, P003. Quantity limits for very small quantity generators. Less than 2 pounds and 20 pence of acute wastes. Acute wastes are usually managed and counted separately from non-acute haze wastes. You can be a large quantity generator for acute waste, but a small quantity generator or very small quantity generator for non-acute hazardous waste. What is point of generation? A facility that generates the hazardous waste must meet RCRA requirements for generators. Hazardous waste must be stored offshore until it is classified and approved for disposal. You must provide adequate storage space for drums and portable tanks. Equipped with secondary containment must contain an impermeable barrier that will contain hazardous waste if spilled. Hazardous waste cannot be shipped until it is sampled, it is properly labeled, it is approved by disposal facility. Transportation is arranged because our facility storage is limited to 10 days. And manifests are completed. All waste is to be identified by waste class, destination facility, etc. Waste profiles. All hazardous waste must be approved by disposal facility prior to shipment. A profile is a description of the waste and its properties, volumes, containers, etc. The generator certifies the accuracy of the profile information. The disposal facility reviews the information, approves and assigns an identifying number for the profile. If you need to dispose of hazardous waste, you will need a waste profile. See if a profile exists for waste already. Check the SDS. For example, the SDS of unused scale remover states the chemical has a pH of 1.9. Any waste with a pH less than 2.0 or greater than 12.5 is a corrosive hazardous waste. Take a sample to determine waste properties. You may know where the waste came from, but not if it is hazardous. Example: spent sandblast material must be sampled for metal concentrations. Wastes from unknown sources will need sampling. TCLP analysis or toxicity characteristic leaching procedure. This is the laboratory analysis that must be conducted to determine if an unknown waste is hazardous. Requires a sample to be collected according to EPA protocol. The Waste Management Manager will review the analysis and advise you of results. TCLP tests can take 2 to 4 weeks, so get a sample as soon as you can. Generator status. Very small quantity generator (VSQG) status. Generates less than 220 pounds per month non-acute waste, and less than 2 pounds and 20 pence acute hazardous waste. 220 pounds is about half a drum, based on the density of water. This is a very small limit. No more than 2,200 pounds can be on site at any one time. No limit on accumulation time. VSQG requirements. Store hazardous waste in approved containers. Hazardous waste containers must be properly labeled. Note: no on-site accumulation or on-site quantity limits. Small quantity generator (SQG) status. Can generate more than 220 pounds but less than 2,200 pounds per month non-acute waste, between 1/2 and 5 drums. Can generate no more than 2 pounds and 20 pence acute waste per month. No more than 13,200 pounds of hazardous waste on site at any one time. Waste accumulation is limited to 180 days. You can take 280 days if your facility is more than 200 miles from disposal site. SQG requirements. Identify the hazardous waste present. Obtain an EPA identification number. Package wastes in .approved containers including proper labels, markings, and accumulation start date. Store the wastes on site for no longer than 180 days, 270 days, if transporting to a disposal facility more than 200 miles away. SQG requirements. Continued. Designate an emergency coordinator and devise contingency, hazard prevention and personnel training plans. Retain copies of all signed manifests for at least 3 years from the date of transport. Retain copies of any test results, waste analyses, or other determinations for at least 3 years from the date of transport. Large Quantity Generator (LQG) status. CAN generates 2,200 pounds or more per month of non-acute waste, about 5 drums. CAN generate 2 pounds and 20 pence or more acute waste. Waste accumulation limit of 90 days. Time critical for sampling of unknown wastes. LQG requirements. Identify the hazardous waste present. Obtain an EPA ID number. Package wastes in .approved containers including proper labels, markings, and accumulation start date. Store the wastes on site for no longer than 90 days. Manifest all hazardous waste using the Uniform Hazardous Waste Manifest. Designate an emergency coordinator and devise contingency, hazard prevention and personnel training plans. LQG requirements. Continued. Retain copies of any test results, waste analyses, or other determinations for at least 3 years from the date of transport. Submit a report every 2 years summarizing the types and quantities of hazardous waste used, methods of disposal employed, and efforts made towards waste minimization and the results of those efforts. Exempt wastes. The following hazard wastes are exempt from the monthly total of waste that determines a facility's generator status. Spent lead-acid or NiCad batteries that are being reclaimed. Universal wastes, for example, fluorescent light bulbs which are being recycled. Used oil. Wastes recycled on site without prior storage/accumulation. Freon captured from refrigeration systems. More recycling means you lower your hazardous waste requirements. Accumulation. With the coordination of the facility site superintendent supervisor/manager. Haze waste accumulation begins when waste is first put into a container. You must label the container with hazardous waste and the date accumulation begins. We use labels provided by Waste Management Manager. These labels meet all information requirements. The information on the labels helps you determine segregation and handling. Storage times are limited, depending on the generator status, which is based on the amount of waste you generate per month. Episodic generation. What happens when a small quantity generator or a very small generator generates an unusual amount of hazardous waste for a short period? If you exceed one of the generator limits in any given month, you immediately become subject to the requirements of the higher status, but only for the months of higher generation. Example, you are a very small generator, but you generate 5,000 pounds of hazardous waste in March. You then generate no more than 40 pounds per month for the remaining months of the year. During March only, you must meet all of the generator requirements for a large quantity generator, including training, inspections, emergency procedures, etc. You may need to register as a large quantity generator with the regulatory agency. Transfer facilities. Transporters accepting hazardous waste from a generator or another transporter may need to hold waste temporarily during the normal course of transit. A transfer facility is defined as any transportation-related facility, such as loading docks, parking areas, storage areas, and other similar areas where shipments are temporarily held. Shore-based terminals receiving hazardous waste from offshore platforms are transfer stations. A hazardous waste transporter may hold waste without a storage permit in containers at a transfer facility for 10 days or less, as long as the waste is manifested and kept in U.S. DOT specification containers. Louisiana requires each transfer station to be registered. SuperDock, Cameron and Morgan City are currently registered. Communication with the field and the disposal facility is very important. Always contact our waste management manager to coordinate hazardous waste disposal. Transfer facility requirements. Security. An adequate security system to minimize unauthorized entry. Post signs that are legible from 25 feet. Inspection requirements. Inspection plan. Completed inspection logs. Deficiencies corrected in a timely manner. Inspection logs maintained at the facility for 3 years. Personnel training. Management personnel have to complete hazardous waste training. Laborers who handle hazardous waste complete job training. Waste segregation. Waste is to be separated and confined from sources of ignition or reaction, sparks, spontaneous ignition, and radiant heat. No smoking signs are to be posted in the area. Transfer facility requirements continued. Preparedness and prevention. Facility equipped with internal communications or alarm system. Telephones or two-way radios available to call emergency response personnel. Portable fire extinguishers, fire control equipment, spill control equipment and decontamination equipment readily available. Equipment is routinely tested to assure proper operation. Water readily available. Sufficient aisle spacing of containers. To allow movement of personnel and equipment. Must have an assigned emergency coordinator. HETOA contingency plan and emergency procedures. Container storage checklist/inspection. Types of containers for hazardous waste. Drums are the most common type of container used for storing and transporting hazardous waste. Hazardous waste storage sites should be kept as neat as possible. For most generators, hazardous waste will be collected in drums or open box containers that are easy for transportation. In general, containers are used for the collection of hazardous waste must meet the following considerations. Be clearly marked for hazardous waste disposal only. Be used only for the disposal of hazardous waste. Do not have incompatible hazardous wastes in the same container, example flammable wastes and oxidizers or acids and alkali corrosives together. Be closed when not in use to reduce vapor production and reduce the possibility of spillage should they be knocked over. Be kept in an area as clean as possible and not surrounded by other drums or containers. Be labeled as a hazardous waste. Types of containers for hazardous waste. No matter what quantity of hazardous waste is stored on site, there are specific requirements on what the hazardous materials can be stored in. In some cases, the hazardous waste cannot be placed in the same container it came in due to the chemical or reactive nature of the hazardous material changing into a hazardous waste. If a container holding hazardous waste is not in good condition or begins to leak, the waste must be transferred to a container in good condition. Containers that hold reactive or ignitable waste have other specific considerations. Due to the possibility of them burning or reacting if exposed to an ignition source, containers of these types of waste must be located at least 50 feet from the facility's property line. This action reduces the chance of ignition or reaction from an outside source. Incompatible hazardous waste. Rule of thumb. Segregate acids from bases. Segregate oxidizers from organics. Segregate cyanides from acids. There is a link in this slide that is a good resource for chemical compatibility. Incompatible hazardous waste continued. Some deadly combinations. Acids plus oil or grease with cause a fire. Acids plus caustics will create heat or spattering. Caustic plus epoxies will create extreme heat. Chlorine gas and acetylene will cause an explosion. Flammable liquids and hydrogen peroxide with cause a fire or explosion. Aluminum powder and aluminum nitrate can cause an explosion. Sodium cyanide and sulfuric acid will cause a lethal hydrogen cyanide. And ammonia and bleach will cause noxious fumes. Secondary containment. State and federal regulations require secondary containment for hazardous waste and for used oil generated on site. All liquid waste should be stored within secondary containment. Storage area requirements. Must have EPA identification numbers. Containers at LQGS are subject to SUPARD a5c4 air emissions standards, which means use approved storage containers. Keep containers closed at all times unless waste is being added or removed. For onshore LQGS, ignitable and reactive waste must be at least 50 feet from property line. Large quantity generator (LQG) and small quantity generator (SQG) status. Inspect weekly. Records of inspections must be available for review. Follow the appropriate hazardous waste checklist in the waste management plan. Very small quantity generator (VSQG) status. No requirements for inspections and record keeping. Make sure containers are approved, in good condition. No accumulation limits but dispose of in timely manner. Storage area requirements for transfer facilities. Containers are in approved containers. Containers closed at all times. Container has a manifested document. Container is logged in shipment inventory. Storage area complies with generator requirements. Inspection plan and records. Plan is covered in Facility Emergency Action Plan (EAP). Inspection records should be filed on company folder T drive. Preparing for hazardous waste shipments. Packaging. Hectowad must be packaged in containers that meet requirements. Labeling. Each container must have appropriate label, for example corrosive, flammable liquid, oxidizer, etc. Marking. Each container of 110 gallons or less must be marked with the following words. Hazardous waste. Federal law prohibits improper disposal. If found, contact the nearest public safety authority or the Environmental Protection Agency. Generator's name and address. Manifest document number. Note. Marking -49 CFR 172 SUPARD D labeling -49 CFR 172 SUPARD E placarding 49 CFR 172 SUPARD F placarding. Transportation vehicles hauling hazardous waste off-site must have the proper US hazard placards posted on them. Most transporters have their own placards. However, it is your responsibility to ensure that the proper placards accompany your shipment. Preparing for hazardous waste shipments continued. Placarding. Transportation vehicles hauling hazardous waste off-site must have the proper US hazard placards posted on them. Most transporters have their own placards. However, it is your responsibility to ensure that the proper placards accompany your shipment. Roles and responsibilities. Offshore operators, generators of hazardous waste. Responsible for maintain compliance at their facilities. ECOs offshore bases. Responsible for maintain compliance at our facilities. Responsible for moving hazardous waste to storage area. Sampling, manifesting, labeling, placarding, characterizing wastes, etc. Waste management manager. Undertake compliance. Training. Common hazardous waste management mistakes. Not closing drums. Always keep container closed unless sampling. Improperly filling out hazardous waste manifests. Most mistakes are in Block 9 of the manifest. Description. The generator is responsible for filing out the manifests correctly even if the transporter fills it out for you. Not keeping training up to date. Using improper containers. Must be approved and in good condition. Older missing contingency plan. Incorrect markings on containers. Excessive accumulation time. 90-day clock. 10-day clock. Misclassifying non-hazardous waste as hazardous waste or vice versa. The cradle-to-grave process. We identify what is hazardous. We identify who the generator is of a hazardous waste. We look at how much hazardous waste can be kept on site. We determine how long hazardous waste can be kept on site. We understand the need of hazardous waste labeling. We know that the uniform hazardous waste manifest must be completely and acutely filled out. EcoServe contacts who manage waste at our facilities are listed on the page. Please feel free to contact them at any time if you have any questions.